My name is Elena Okafor, and 4 months ago I watched my mother-in-law's face drain of all color when the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs walked into her living room, addressed me as Your Excellency's daughter, and asked if my father, the president, sent his regards. Just 30 seconds earlier, she'd been telling her friends I was a village girl who'd trapped her precious son. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ice melting in their champagne glasses. But let me tell you how the daughter of a sitting African head of state endured 2 years of insults while keeping her identity secret. Because this story begins with a choice I made for love that cost me more than anyone knew. I grew up in Abuja, Nigeria, behind presidential security details and bulletproof glass. My father, President Emmanuel Okafor, had been in office for 6 years when this story started. My mother was a former diplomat. I had 3 siblings, all pursuing international careers. I was 26, had degrees from Oxford and the London School of Economics, and was expected to marry within political or diplomatic circles. That was the life everyone assumed I'd have, until I met David Adebayo at a UN Development Program conference in Geneva 2.5 years ago. David was there as a mid-level program officer working on agricultural initiatives in West Africa. I was there as part of the Nigerian delegation, but I'd specifically requested not to be identified as the president's daughter. I was registered under my mother's maiden name, Elena Nwosu, because I was tired of people treating me like a political chess piece instead of a person. David and I ended up sitting next to each other during a panel discussion on sustainable farming. He was brilliant, passionate about rural development, and had no idea who I was. When he asked me to coffee afterward, he did it because he thought I was interesting, not because of my last name. We dated long distance for 8 months. He was based in Accra, Ghana. I was moving between Abuja and London for my graduate research on economic development policy. Every time we met, in quiet cafes in Accra or during my visits to see him, I was just Elena. Not the president's daughter, not a political asset, just me. It was the most freedom I'd ever felt. I kept waiting for the right moment to tell him the truth, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. How do you tell someone you've fallen in love with that you've been lying about your identity for months? The truth came out in the most awkward way possible. David proposed after a year of dating during a weekend in Cape Coast. He got down on one knee on the beach at sunset with a simple gold band he'd saved for, and I said yes through tears. Then I had to tell him. That night, in our hotel room, I finally explained who I really was. I showed him my diplomatic passport, my real ID, news articles about my family. He stared at them for what felt like an hour. "You're President Okafor's daughter," he said quietly. "Elena Okafor." I nodded, terrified he'd feel betrayed. Instead, he started laughing, this incredulous, slightly hysterical laugh. "I proposed to the president's daughter with a $200 ring." I grabbed his hands. "I said yes because I love you, not because of what ring you could afford." But that revelation changed things. David insisted on doing everything properly, which meant asking my father's permission. That meeting was terrifying for him. We flew to Abuja, and David, wearing his best suit, sat in the presidential villa across from my father and formally requested my hand in marriage. My father, to his credit, was gracious. He asked David about his work, his intentions, his values. By the end, he gave his blessing. But then came the hard part. David wanted to tell his family the truth before the wedding. I asked him not to. Here's why. David's family was upper-middle-class Lagos society. His father was a successful corporate lawyer, his mother was a retired bank executive, and they had very specific ideas about status and propriety. When David first told them he was engaged before they knew who I was, they were excited. But then they met me. I deliberately dressed simply, no designer clothes or expensive jewelry. I spoke about my work in development economics but downplayed my education. I wanted them to know the real me first, not the political trophy. That was my mistake. David's mother, Patricia Adebayo, took one look at me and decided I was beneath her family. Within an hour of our first meeting at their home in Victoria Island, she pulled David aside. I heard her through the kitchen door. "Where is her family from? What do they do? David, please tell me you've done proper background checks. I'm not being difficult, but we need to know who we're welcoming into this family." David, trying to be respectful of my wishes, gave vague answers. That made everything worse. Over the next 6 months of wedding planning, the insults started slowly and then escalated. At first it was passive-aggressive comments. "Alina dear, for the traditional wedding, will your family be able to afford the proper ceremonies? We Adebayos have a reputation to uphold." I'd smile and say we'd work it out. Then came more direct attacks. David's mother asked me outright how much my bride price would be, implying my family would be demanding money they didn't deserve. She asked about my father's occupation, and when I said he worked in public service, she literally scoffed. "Public service, I see. So we'll be funding this wedding then." The worst was at a family dinner 3 months before the wedding. David's extended family was there, aunts and uncles and cousins, all Lagos elite. His mother had been drinking wine, and she turned to me in front of everyone. "Elena, be honest with us. Did you target my son because of his family's money? Because we've seen girls like you before, pretty village girls who think they can marry up and secure their future." The table went silent. David started to defend me, but I stopped him. I looked Patricia in the eyes and said calmly, "Mrs. Adebayo, I love your son. That's the only reason I'm marrying him. I don't need his money or his family's status." She smiled coldly. "Of course you'd say that, they all do. Have you ever been in a situation where you could end someone's disrespect instantly, but chose not to because of principle? Let me know in the comments, because those 6 months tested everything I believed about humility and integrity. I could have told them the truth at any point. One phone call to my father's chief of staff and Patricia Adebayo would have been apologizing within the hour. But I wanted David's family to accept me for who I was, not what my last name could do for them. The wedding planning became a nightmare. Patricia insisted on controlling everything, constantly reminding me that since my family apparently couldn't afford a proper wedding, the Adebayos would handle it. She picked the venue, a nice but not extravagant hotel in Lagos. She picked my dress, something she deemed appropriate for someone of my background. She limited my guest list to 20 people, saying my village relatives would embarrass them. I went along with all of it because David begged me to keep the peace. He was caught between his family and me, and I could see it tearing him apart. My own family was confused by my choices. My mother asked why I was letting them treat me this way. "Just tell them, Elena. This is ridiculous." But I was stubborn. I told myself that if David's family couldn't respect me without knowing about my father, then their respect meant nothing. My father was more pragmatic. "When this blows up, and it will blow up, the Adebayos are going to regret every word they said to you." I told him I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the wedding. Patricia hosted a bridal shower that she'd planned without consulting me. It was full of her friends, wealthy Lagos women who spent the afternoon making thinly veiled comments about gold diggers and social climbers. One woman, a friend of Patricia's named Ngozi, actually said to my face, "Well, at least you're pretty. That's something. David could have done worse." I sat there in a dress Patricia had picked out, surrounded by women who thought I was an opportunist, and I made a decision. If they wanted to humiliate me, fine. But they'd learn the truth eventually, and when they did, I'd make sure the lesson landed. I called my father that night. "Papa, I need a favor. For the wedding, can you send a representative, someone senior with security detail, and make sure it's very visible?" My father was quiet for a moment. "Elena, are you sure? This will expose everything." I was sure. David knew I was planning something, but I didn't tell him exactly what. "Trust me," I said. "Your family needs to learn a lesson, but I want to do it on our wedding day so they can never take back what they said." The wedding was set for a Saturday in November. The morning of, Patricia was in full control mode, ordering people around, making sure everything reflected well on the Adebayo name. My small contingent of 20 guests started arriving early. Then the first hint of something unusual happened. 3 black SUVs pulled up, the kind with diplomatic plates and tinted windows. Out stepped men in dark suits with earpieces. Patricia noticed and looked annoyed. "Elena, who are these people? This isn't a state function." Then my family arrived. My mother, elegant in traditional Nigerian attire, was accompanied by 2 aides. My siblings, all dressed impeccably, drew stares. But it was when my father's chief of staff arrived, along with the director of state security, that people started whispering. Patricia approached me, confused and slightly panicked. "Elena, what is happening? Why are there security personnel here?" I smiled sweetly. "Just some family friends, Mrs. Adebayo. Nothing to worry about." The traditional ceremony went forward. David and I exchanged vows in Yoruba custom, and I could see him watching me with this mix of love and curiosity, knowing something was coming but not what. The reception was held in the hotel ballroom. Patricia had seated my family in a corner, away from the prominent Adebayo relatives and their society friends. That was about to become very awkward for her. Midway through the reception, during dinner, there was a commotion at the entrance. The security detail that had been discreetly positioned around the room suddenly became very active. Patricia's friend Ngozi grabbed her arm. "Patricia, why is there a motorcade outside? And why are there armed guards moving into position?" Patricia looked toward the entrance, and I watched her face change as she realized something very wrong was happening. Or very right, depending on your perspective. The Minister of Foreign Affairs entered first, a woman named Ambassador Stella Okonkwo, someone whose face was regularly on national television. Behind her were 2 other cabinet members and several members of the National Assembly. The room went completely silent. Every Lagos society person in that room recognized these faces. Ambassador Okonkwo walked directly to our table, completely bypassing the Adebayo family seating, and came straight to me. "Elena," she said warmly, and her voice carried across the now silent ballroom. "I apologize for arriving late. Your father, the president, wanted to attend personally, but security concerns made it impossible. He sends his deepest love and asks that you call him tonight." She handed me an envelope. A wedding gift from the first family. Then she turned to David. "Congratulations on your marriage to the president's daughter. Your father-in-law speaks very highly of you." The explosion of whispers that followed was like thunder. I watched it happen in slow motion. Patricia's face went from confusion to shock to absolute horror as the implications hit her. Ngozi literally gasped out loud. David's father, who'd been quietly condescending to me for months, stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. People were pulling out their phones, searching my name, finding news articles about President Okfor's daughter Elena, seeing my face in photos from state functions I'd attended. The truth spread through the room like wildfire. Ambassador Okonkwo continued, addressing the room now. "For those who don't know, Elena Okafor completed her master's in development economics at Oxford before joining the policy advisory team for economic development. She's chosen to work under her mother's maiden name to avoid the complications that come with being the president's daughter. The first family is very proud of her dedication to serving Nigeria through her work, rather than trading on her family name." She smiled at me. "Though perhaps, Elena, you let that dedication go a bit too far in this case." Patricia stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and what I can only describe as dawning mortification. Her friend Ngozi looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The same women who'd spent months treating me like a social climber were now realizing they'd been insulting the president's daughter. To her face. Repeatedly. The security detail, now clearly identified as Presidential Guard, took positions around my family's table. Suddenly, the corner Patricia had relegated us to was the center of the entire room. David squeezed my hand under the table. He was trying not to laugh. "You let them call you a gold digger for 6 months, he whispered. "You let my mother pick your dress," I whispered back. "I wanted them to respect me for me, not my father. They chose not to. Now they get to live with that choice." Patricia approached our table, and I could see her hands shaking. "Elena, we didn't, if we had known." I stood up, and suddenly I wasn't the quiet, modest girl she'd been dismissing for months. I was the president's daughter, educated at Oxford, advisor on national policy, and someone who'd spent 6 months documenting every insult with perfect recall. "Mrs. Adebayo," I said, and my voice was calm but carried across the silent room, "you didn't know because I chose not to tell you. I wanted you to get to know me as a person before you knew my family background. You chose instead to judge me as beneath you, to call me a gold digger, to imply I was trapping your son for money." The room was dead silent. Every phone was out, recording. This would be on social media within minutes. I let you plan a wedding you thought my family couldn't afford, while my father offered to host it at the presidential villa. I wore the dress you picked because you thought I couldn't afford better, while I have a closet full of custom pieces from Paris Fashion Week. I sat through your friends calling me a social climber while I've dined with world leaders. I paused. Not because I'm better than you, Mrs. Adebayo, but because you never gave me the chance to show you who I actually was. You saw a modest girl and assumed poverty. You saw humility and mistook it for weakness. Patricia was crying now, and part of me felt bad for her, but only part. Elena, please, I'm so sorry. We would never have, if we had known. I cut her off gently. That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Adebayo. You would never have treated me that way if you'd known, which means your respect is conditional on status and power, not on character. I hope today teaches you to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of what you think they can offer you. The rest of the reception was surreal. Every society figure in Lagos who'd heard Patricia's stories about the gold digger daughter-in-law suddenly wanted to meet me, to apologize, to take photos. The Adebayo family sat at their table in shell-shocked silence, while Nigerian media outlets that had gotten word of the president's daughter's wedding started arriving. My mother, who'd watched this all unfold with barely suppressed amusement, finally came over. Elena, darling, that was perhaps the most elegantly brutal thing I've ever witnessed. David's father approached me privately, tears in his eyes, and genuinely apologized. He'd been condescending but never cruel, and I believed his remorse was real. The aftermath took weeks to settle. The story went viral, of course. President's daughter endures months of insults, reveals identity at wedding was the headline. Social media was split between people who thought I'd been petty and people who thought the Adebayos got exactly what they deserved. Patricia issued a public apology that was clearly written by a PR professional. Ngozi deleted all her social media accounts. But the real resolution came in private. 2 weeks after the wedding, David and I invited his parents to dinner at our new home. Patricia came in humble, genuinely remorseful. Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me quickly or easily. What I said to you, how I treated you, it was wrong regardless of who your father is. I was a snob and a bully, and you showed me grace I didn't deserve by not exposing me sooner. I looked at this woman who'd made my life miserable for months, and I realized something. She'd learned. Actually learned. Mrs. Adebayo, I'm going to be your daughter-in-law for hopefully a very long time. I'd like us to build a real relationship based on mutual respect. Can we start over? She nodded, crying again, and this time when she hugged me it felt genuine. David's father shook my hand. You're a remarkable young woman, Elena. My son is lucky to have you, and not because of your last name. That meant more than any of the groveling had. Here's what I want you to understand about this story. I didn't hide my identity to trap anyone or to play games. I did it because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I represented. The lesson wasn't that I'm better than the Adebayos or their friends. The lesson is that everyone deserves basic human respect, regardless of their background. Patricia and her friends learned that the hard way, in front of Lagos society and national media. But they learned. David and I have been married for 4 months now. His family has genuinely tried to make amends. My father actually likes David's father now that they've spent time together without pretense. My mother and Patricia have found common ground. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's what I wanted all along. I still work in development economics, still publish under my mother's maiden name for professional separation. David and I live a relatively normal life, or as normal as life can be when your father-in-law is the president. But we built our relationship on honesty and love, and that foundation is worth more than all the status in the world. Where are you watching from? Drop your country below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. If you think watching someone's preconceptions get shattered in real time was satisfying, wait until you hear about the woman whose business partner forced her out of their startup with a lowball buyout, claiming she didn't have the skills to scale the company. 18 months later, she sold her competing company to their biggest competitor for $40 million. and the acquisition specifically excluded her old partner's company from the deal. The board meeting where they realized they'd been outmaneuvered is the kind of corporate chess that'll make you believe in karma. That story's coming next, and it'll teach you that the best response to being underestimated is building something so undeniable that the people who dismissed you become footnotes in your success story. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most powerful weapon you have isn't your connections or your background. It's the choice to maintain your dignity when others lose theirs.